Nature and Mind by Frederick James E. Woodbridge, published in 1937. The principal ideas of which are that pragmatism is important because of its emphasis on contexts and operations. The pragmatic method is useful for the clarification of ideas. Despite pragmatism's usefulness as a method of clarification, it errs in rejecting objects antecedent to knowledge to which an idea must conform if it is to be true. The alternative to a theory of perception, which makes ideas the objects of perception, is an operational realism, a theory which rejects sensations as myths and which understands perception as a sense operation directed at all objects. A cooperative working of naturalism and humanism, of science and art is the natural outcome of a theory in which the antithesis between science and metaphysics is regarded as unfortunate. This collection of essays by Professor Woodbridge was presented to the author on the occasion of his 70th birthday by Amherst College, the University of Minnesota, and Columbia University, institutions with which he was associated. He was a graduate of Amherst, where his interest in philosophy had been stimulated by a famous teacher of the subject, Professor Garman, and he had taught at both Minnesota and Columbia. The essays were carefully selected to bring out in a unified way Woodbridge's position and its development. Its priority to the work of G. E. Moore and Bertrand Russell is worth noting. The collection begins with the essay Confessions, which Woodbridge contributed to the project, Contemporary American Philosophy. After this conscientious review of his thought, come sections on metaphysics, logic, consciousness, and cognition. The conclusion consists of addresses on various occasions. Taken together, the material gives a clear picture of the man and his work. And anyone who reads these essays carefully is put in touch with philosophy as it was developing in the United States in the first part of the 20th century. Woodbridge's reaction to pragmatism is particularly interesting. It was similar to that of the new realists and the critical realists. It is clear that he wanted cognition to be direct, and he was fearful of a subjective consciousness engrossed with ideas. Woodbridge had a keen interest in the history of philosophy and a sense for its currents. Of equal importance was his interest in the growth of the positive sciences. In a broad sense, he was a realist, as much one of attitude as of specific doctrine. It is said that he was fond of quoting from Matthew Arnold, the saying, and I quote, "Things are what they are, and the consequences of them will be what they will be. Why then should we wish to be deceived?" Professor Sterling Lambrecht, one of Woodbridge's students, who later taught at Amherst, sums up his teacher's perspective in these words, and I quote, "This kind of attitude was bound to generate doctrines when it was firmly sustained through a course of philosophical reflections. It was bound to generate metaphysical doctrines." End quote. The metaphysical view resulting was analytic in character and was concerned with nature and man's inclusion in it. There was nothing about this metaphysics of that transcendental import which current positivism had in mind when it rejected metaphysics. Perhaps the term ontology is less misleading. In any case, the Viennese positivists were contending with German idealists and existentialists and had little knowledge of American philosophy. Both American pragmatism and American realism were, in the main, naturalistic in perspective, while British empiricism tended to link up with Hume. Such was not so much the case in American thought. Woodbridge tended to wrestle more with Locke than with Hume. He kept up an interest in Aristotle and sought to revise these ancient categories. It is evident that the parochialism of Cambridge talking to Oxford did not dominate his thought. Philosophers who get engrossed in minor technicalities are sometimes led to affirm the incredible, and Woodbridge sensed this danger in connection with traditional idealism. Surely the world is not mind-dependent. The cure he advocated was ever-fresh contact with concrete realities. Confront the abstract with the factual. Take second thoughts. In his Confessions, Woodbridge indicates that Aristotle, Spinoza, and Locke were the philosophers in whom he was most interested. Perhaps Hobbes should be added. When Santayana's Life of Reason came out in 1905, Woodbridge reviewed it. It seemed to him a matchless commentary on human thinking, for it exhibited the passage from the natural to the ideal, from common sense to reason. The continued interest in Santayana at Columbia, as against his neglect at Harvard, perhaps stems from this enthusiasm. Woodbridge was seeking to revise Aristotle's categories of prime matter and form in order to substitute structure, behaviour, and a natural teleology of sequence. These general characteristics of the world he thought of as metaphysically fundamental. One can note a certain impatience with epistemology. As was the case with Dewey, there was frustration, the feeling that philosophy had become so immersed in the operation of knowing that it had made states of mind their own objects. But was epistemology to blame here? Is not the concentration on states of mind a bad foundation for epistemology? After all, can we have knowledge about the world without cognitive operations? The struggle between pragmatism, new realism, and critical realism in American philosophy was to concern itself with the need for a reorientation in epistemology. Pragmatism under Dewey took the path of a logic of inquiry, but Woodbridge wanted to keep ideas and things somehow together. Consciousness, he held, was relational. It seems that he meant by consciousness cognition or consciousness of something. The term is unfortunately ambiguous. A stream of consciousness, to use James's expression, is one thing, and an act of cognition or directed knowledge claim is another. While a little impatient with the vanities of epistemology, Woodbridge faced up to the unavoidable problems. Somehow ideas, mind, and the order of things had to be brought together. While Locke stressed ideas, Spinoza emphasized logic and discourse and substance. Here was kinship with Aristotle. In this setting, Woodbridge worked out his analytic metaphysics of structure and behaviour and his notion of natural teleology. Oh, I'm tired. I'll keep going now. To Aristotle, he owed his recognition of the importance of language. Truth is not a matter of nature. The saying of things is. I'll say that again. This is important. Truth is not a matter of nature. The saying of things is. Such retrospection enables us to comprehend Woodbridge's intellectual odyssey. It is clear that he had early rejected subjectivism and idealism because they involved wrong perspectives. But the job was to connect cognition with the natural order of things. What he was after was a direct realism. As with the new realists, who were becoming vocal at the time, this was taken to involve presentationalism of the givenness of the object. Woodbridge struggled with sensations in this connection. Can they be given up and be translated into sensings? Dewey faced the same problem in a similar attempt to escape the subjective and the intracortical. But cannot we have a direct realism while regarding sensations as guiding perceiving when perceiving is regarded as a referential act concerned with external things? The emphasis then is upon cognizing and as a mediated achievement. A good place to begin, if one wants to appreciate Woodbridge's setting in American thought, is with the essays The Promise of Pragmatism and Experience and Dialectic. Woodbridge believed that the value of pragmatism lay in its stress upon the clarification of meanings, and that the shift to the problem of truth was, in many ways, unfortunate. And I quote, "When it was claimed that an idea is true because it works, the rejoinder was ready and well nigh inevitable that an idea works because it is true. As a good Aristotelian, Woodbridge probably took agreement with existence to be the criterion of truth. The valuable feature of pragmatism was, then, its stress upon context and upon operations. One can understand otherwise cryptic remarks if one focuses on their contexts. Woodbridge's remarks on Whitehead and Sir Arthur Eddington in this connection show robust common sense. What does one mean by society? How could one send out a message tomorrow and receive it today? To answer such questions, any shift in vocabulary should be indicated. What is the context of one's remarks? The dogma which denies that ideas could possibly represent, stand for or duplicate objects might well submit itself to pragmatic analysis." In the second essay mentioned above, Woodbridge queries Dewey's proneness to dialectical discourse. While granting Dewey's starting point, the need to exercise intelligence in reflective thinking on problems, Woodbridge does not admit that it involves a rejection of objects antecedent to knowledge, to which knowledge must conform to be successful. He asks whether Dewey's rejection of antecedent objects follows from his emphasis upon inquiry. He claims that Dewey's statement to the effect that only the conclusions of reflective inquiry are known begs the question, really, do what things are and the way they operate depend upon the outcome of inquiry? Is there not a touch of anthropomorphism in Dewey's position? Man is a sample of nature, but there are many other samples. Dewey seems to argue them into illegitimacy. He expresses a preference for the precarious and incompleted. The outcome is a dialectical playing off of the permanent and the changing in a conceptual way against one another. Dialectic is put in the place of the kind of metaphysics that fits in analytically with investigation. Why did Dewey think in this fashion? One answer is that he associated permanence with the timeless and eternal of objective idealism. Woodbridge is restrained in his criticisms, but they have a point. It is unfortunate that so many American philosophers think that they have to choose between Russell's philosophy as inspired by Hume and vitalized by mathematical logic, and Dewey's instrumentalism. Woodbridge was seeking a realistic alternative. In his criticism of epistemology, Woodbridge had in mind Lockean interposition of ideas as cognitively terminal. He had learned the lesson of Locke's unperceived things and its support for idealism, and thus he thought of epistemology contextually. In his theory of perception, Dewey was motivated, much as Woodbridge was, by the fear of a subjective mind. It would be absurd to end up with cognition terminating on and concerned only with mental states in the brain. One must firmly reject this cortical and subcutaneous view of the status of mind. What is the alternative? Present tensional realism. Things are as they are experienced. It is an affair of behavioural transactions. In many ways, Woodbridge's answer is similar to Dewey's. Eyes and ears are for sensing what is out there to be sensed. Sensing is a form of cognition and does not require those peculiar entities which psychologists call sensations. The interesting fact is that Woodbridge returned to this question again and again. He had a marked feeling for the realities of the situation. Nothing G.E. Moore wrote is superior to Woodbridge's little essay in this book entitled The Deception of the Senses. As he puts it, our proper question is not what is the thing, but why does it appear different? Why does the straight stick in the water appear bent? His answer is that the stick must appear bent under these conditions. Science has its explanation in terms of optics. Railroad tracks look as though they converged. In Nature and Mind, Woodbridge does not once refer to Moore. There were at this time two centres of thought in the English-speaking world. The British group gradually edged away from the Americans, and the era of Moore, Russell and Wittgenstein began. Oxford talked with Cambridge and Americans began to listen in. The whole development is complex and it must not be oversimplified. Is there not another alternative to subjectivism? The whole question of the mechanism of perceiving senses of perceiving comes up for consideration. May not sensations guide response and be information carrying? What we really do in perceiving is to refer selectively to the things around us and to characterize them. We develop concepts in touch with the information carrying sensations. But the import of the concepts is objective and concerns what we are referring to. The unit on which all this is founded is sensory motor. The brain is not primarily concerned with itself, it is an organ of adjustment. Having taken the alternative of sensing things and not having sensations and appearances to be used in cognition of the referential sort, Woodbridge argued that consciousness must be relational. Consciousness of something is cognitional and makes no difference to things. Woodbridge argues that sensations as traditionally conceived are myths. Gilbert Ryle, in The Concept of Mind of 1949, had sought to do the same in terms of linguistic behaviorism. What Woodbridge puts in the place of sensations are sensings, operations directed at objects. The operations are the same, it is the objects that differ. Thus both Dewey and Woodbridge returned to native or presentational realism in order to escape subjectivism. Things are as they are sensed, though sensing has its complex external conditions, as in the case of the stick that looks bent in the water or the case of converging railroad tracks. But could we not equally say that we perceive through our sensations, thus conditioned, the things we are looking at? We use this evidence of our senses elocution which is well founded. In this manner also we can escape the influence of the introspective tradition, combined as this was with the limited causal approach which neglected response. Sensations are not cognitively terminal, but they are aids in perceiving. It was this line that the critical realists began to explore. So far as cognition is concerned, it is also a form of objective realism. That is, it is the external thing to which we are responding and to which we are referring. Curiously enough, while the United States has been conventionally a religious area, its social science and philosophy have been dominantly naturalistic, as is recognized abroad. None of the four existentialist theologians, Maritain, Berdyaev, I must get these names right, Maritain, Berdyaev, Buber, Frederick, of whom we hear so much later after Woodbridge, is an American thinker. None of those four existentialist theologians are American thinkers. Woodbridge, of course, antedated existentialism. He was concerned to qualify traditional naturalism by including man in nature and spelling out a natural theology. I've done it again. He was concerned to qualify traditional naturalism by including man in nature and spelling out a natural teleology. I wonder if that's a Freudian slip. In his view, everything is somehow real and must be taken account of. Perhaps the positive sciences have been too much under the spell of the mechanical, and literary humanism has tended to look backward and exalt the past. But the present alone is actual and creative. It is well to have a long vista, but it should lead up to the situation of the time. Thus the cooperative working of naturalism and humanism, of science and art,